down and taught the people out of the ship. Now when he had left speaking, he said unto Simon, Launch out into the deep, and let down your nets for a draught. And Simon answered, saying unto him, Master, we have toiled all the night, and have taken nothing. Nevertheless, at thy word I will let down the net. And when they had done this, they enclosed a great multitude of fishes, and their net brake. And they beckoned unto their partners which were in the other ship, that they should come and help them. And they came and filled both the ships, so that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. For he was astonished, and all that were with him at the draught of the fishes which they had taken. And so was also James and John, the sons of Zebedee, which were partners with Simon. And Jesus said unto Simon, Fear not, from henceforth thou shalt catch men. And when they had brought their ships to land, they forsook all, and followed him.
Praise be to thee, O Christ.
They had fished all night, caught nothing. And then at Jesus' command, they let down their nets and brought in a great multitude of fishes. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, our God is one. These men did not fish for a hobby. They didn't bring in their income through some desk job, and then once every month or two go out on the weekends, some beers in the ice chest, just so they could catch a couple catfish to fry it for lunch. Get a big bass that they could mount up on the wall. These were professional fishermen. This is what they knew best. This was their career. This was their livelihood. This is how they fed their families. They knew what they were doing. And yet, all night they fished, using all of their skill, using all of their expertise, and nothing happened. They didn't catch any fish. It was a complete bust. It would be like cooking for a whole month and not selling a single set. It would be like working for a whole month in the hospital and just nothing goes right. You can't seem to hit a single vein with the IV. You can't seem to get anybody's medications. Just nothing goes right. You've been doing your job for years. You've been doing it well. You've been feeding your families, and you just can't get the job done. You ever had days like that? I think we all have. And there's even icons made of this miracle. This miracle where Jesus simply gives the word and they throw out the nets, and these nets that for a full night had brought in nothing suddenly bring in so many fish that it nearly sinks 2 boats. And when I first started looking at this, thinking about the sermon for this week, one of the things that hit my mind was, is this really even a miracle? It's impressive. It shows his power. But is there anything unique or special here? Because doesn't God always have command over all the fish, over all the animals? Don't they always obey him? Don't they always go where he tells them to go? And I got to thinking, what about during the night? During the night when they were fishing, and they threw the net in, and this is not one of these little nets like you just throw out to get a few shad so that you can have bait. We're talking big, huge, giant nets that takes multiple men to get out. You're using a boat, you're dragging it, and finally you're reeling in this huge net. like you see on commercial fishing boats on the Discovery Channel. It's a lot of work to throw out this net and pull it in. They throw it out, they pull it in, and there is not one fish. Has it ever occurred to you that that was just as much a miracle? We should have icons of the night before. Like with 100 different frames of Peter, James, and John throwing the net out and getting nothing. And then doing it again and getting nothing. You realize Jesus was in charge of the fish that night too? The 100 times, the 500 times they threw the net out and got nothing. Jesus was still in charge of the fish. You see, it's just as easy for Jesus to direct the fish away from your nets as it is for him to direct the fish into your nets. It's not as if the fish were autonomous and having no relation or obedience to God and just going about their merry way in the sea. And then finally, this weird thing happens where just this one narrow point in time, okay, Jesus has control over the fish. What a miracle. He always has control over the fish. And to make sure that they would be astonished, Jesus made sure that 100 times they'd throw their nets in and get nothing. So that when he spoke, and they threw it in one more time in obedience, and then their nets were filled, they'd have just the reaction that Peter had. Fall on his knees before the incarnate God, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, and say, "Depart from me, I'm a sinful man. I don't deserve to even be in your presence. I know who you are." Think about Elijah. Remember the story of Elijah in the Old Testament, where there had been this great drought in the land for 3.5 years. Crops, cattle were dead, parched. People were desperately in need of water. And then Elijah prays, and he sends his servant to run and go look in the horizon, and he sees nothing. He comes back, and he sends him again, and he runs back. And finally, I think it's the 7th time he runs and looks at the horizon, he says, "I see a little cloud on the horizon. It looks like, it's about the size of a man's hand." And it was very shortly later that day that the torrent of downpours came down. And we regard that as a miracle. But do you remember where the drought came from? See, 3.5 years earlier, God had instructed Elijah to pray, and Elijah prayed that it would not rain. And so the drought, as well as the downpour, was from the Lord. In our lives, we go through both. We go through droughts. We go through downpours. We go through our nights and our days and our weeks, and sometimes it feels like even years, that you just sow and you sow and you sow and nothing sprouts, nothing grows. At least not like you expected it. You're fishing and you're fishing and you're fishing and you've got nothing to show for it. All your years of experience bring no fruit. All of your hard labors bring no fruit. All of your fancy equipment, no fruit. You get despair and you get upset and you get mad at God and you start asking, "Why me, O Lord?" But then in His time, for His purposes, He also knows how to open the floodgates of heaven and to pour on us such a blessing that we can't even contain it. It works that way in the church sometimes too. You know, the church for the past couple thousand years has called itself an ark of salvation, a boat. The flood waters are out there drowning the world in sin and in the passions and selfishness and in destruction. And then here's this little boat called the church, driven by Christ, and you get into that boat with the Orthodox Church, and you're still going to experience the storm, you're still going to experience the waves, but you're going to preserve your life. Your eternal soul is going to be preserved, and you're going to come to dock in paradise. And at one point in the Gospels, Jesus compares evangelism and bringing people into the church like fishing. Not with a fishing pole with bait, but with a net that you cast out wide. And you drag in all sorts of fishes. And you bring them all into the boat. And some are good, some are bad. Some you keep, some you get rid of. You don't pick and choose based on what kind of bait you use. You bring them all in, then you separate them out. And we can accept that, because at least when you see a lot of people coming in, and some stay in and some leave, and you figure, okay, well, there's this constant influx, there's this constant thing going on. But how do we think about it? How do we deal with it? How do we respond emotionally? When you go through periods of time that you're talking to your neighbors, you're having people over to eat, you're having email conversations, you're talking to people about orthodoxy, you're talking to people about Christ, and it feels like you're fishing all night long. And you drag the net in, and you're exhausted, and you open the net up. There's not one fish. There's nothing in it. It may be family members that live nearby or that live far away that you've been trying for years to bring in. And you just keep fishing, and you keep fishing, and you keep fishing, and nothing. It may be this little boat, this little piece of the church that we call Christ the King, Orthodox Church in Omaha. And you go through your good days, your bad days, your good weeks, bad weeks, but then sometimes you go whole stretches of time that you feel like, man, we're just casting the net out there. We're talking to people, we're witnessing for Christ, for orthodoxy, we're advertising, we're talking to people, we're being nice to people, we're doing kind things for people, and well, I guess nobody knew when to come again. And you feel like you've been fishing all night long, and there's no fish. But if it's true that Jesus is always in control of the fish, then is it possible that he knows what he's doing better than we do? Is it possible that he knows the right timing? Is it possible that he knows the changes not only that he needs to work in the fish, but also in the fishermen? He knew